Hello and welcome to the CANCAST with me, your host, Paul Moore. The CANCAST is a place of open discussion and it's an open forum for people across all political spectrums, age, races, colours, and creeds involved at the heart of medical cannabis. A place where we talk about medical cannabis as patients, but we also take the opinions of lawyers, solicitors, barristers, anybody in the criminal field who deals with cannabis convictions. But we also talk to consultant physicians, doctors, specialists, pain management experts, and people who prescribe these drugs. But first and foremost, we talk to people like you, patients. This is a patient-led, patient-driven podcast, which is designed for us to hear what we need to hear in order to give us the confidence and the surety that we're doing the right thing, not only in a legal perspective, but also from a moral perspective, and to understand the considerations of other people out there in society for how we medicate and how we use our medication in daily lives. But most importantly, and in amongst all of that, we're here to hear people's opinions and have fun and discuss this topic openly to break the stigma. So thank you very much for tuning in. I really look forward to interacting with some of you. Get in touch through email at paul@cancard.co.uk and enjoy the show. Thank you. Hello and welcome again to another episode of the CANCAST with me, Paul Moore, and my lovely guest for today, David. This is a little bit of a change of pace. David Hardstaff is with us now. David is a partner at BCL, and David is on a conquest right now. Well, actually, do you know what? I won't say it. I will let you say it, David. Actually, it'll sound way more official.
I was about to say that makes it sound very dramatic and heroic when it's neither of those. But no, thanks for having me on, Paul. And it's really nice to have some time to chat with you about these things. And thanks for all the great work you guys are doing with CanCard. And it's just really, really important, and it definitely feeds into some of my recent experiences, which I'll be touching on. But yeah, just by way of background, so I'm a partner at the law firm BCL Solicitors based in Holborn in central London. And I mean, by stock and trade, I'm actually I'm a criminal lawyer, a criminal solicitor, specializing in what we call serious and general crime and regulatory law. But most of my work would be centered around representing individuals who have been accused of criminal offences. And as a bit of an offshoot of that, and by virtue of a quite nice lining of the stars, our firm has developed for itself quite a strong practice in, I suppose, what you broadly speaking call cannabis law. So the sort of law that touches on the proliferation of cannabis as a medicinal product in this country, most notably since the law changed in 2018 to allow greater access. I say greater access, and that's something we can talk about, or could probably talk for a very long time about. Yeah, you've been there. Greater access to medicinal cannabis products.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of our sort of skill set, I mean, we originally got into this space through our expertise in criminal law, in regulatory law and licensing, and also in relation to proceeds of crime and anti-money laundering. And so, on any given day, we could be advising a company who is looking to buy over a cannabis company in another country, and they need advice in relation to, how to do business with that subsidiary without falling foul of proceeds of crime laws here. On another day of the week, we could be assisting a young startup looking to apply for a home office license to cultivate cannabis for medicinal research and that sort of thing.
Okay.
But then I suppose going back to the issue for today's discussion, I cut my teeth on serious and general crime in the magistrates' courts, motoring law, and that sort of thing. And more recently, I've had experience assisting cannabis patients who have found themselves at the sharp end of the law and found out just how difficult it is to be taken seriously as a patient.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm so sorry. I never, I never understood how complex and wide your scope of work really was in your experience. So I apologize for that. as far as it goes, so far as we've talked at a distance, like I understood that you had this sort of experience helping cannabis patients essentially with these motoring incidents, right? Which is it's so strange. Like here at CanCard, the topic of the moment changes
Yeah.
every 5 minutes, right? And there's only so much bandwidth. And the funny thing is that things are so serendipitous. Like, so once I was introduced to you via email very briefly, and you wanted
Hmm.
to, engage with us, which is amazing. So thank you so much for that. First of all, that you are willing to come on and talk to us about this clearly massively serious element of people's lives. No later than a 24-hour period did I get 3 emails in my inbox from CAN card holders that are facing the exact circumstances of which we discussed and we had a preliminary chat about.
Yeah.
It's so honestly, you couldn't make it up. I'm convinced that we're living in a simulation. I'm absolutely convinced because this is just too it's too much, and there's nobody talking about this. It's just literally we had a conversation, and then 24 hours later, three messages in my inbox. People saying, "Hey, listen, I'm getting my license removed. I'm
Yeah.
up in court on the
Yeah.
14th. I don't know what to do. I'm prescribed. Here's my prescription. I've spoke to my doctor. I've spoke to my clinic. They can't help. What do I do?" And we're like, well, first of all, you should have maybe give us a bit more notice than a week. That would be a start. Second of all, what happened? And third of all, have you even protested your innocence? Have you showed them that you're a medical patient? And well, a couple of those I can issue no ticks because they never did any of those things. But some of the people are a bit more proactive. But it's such a it's such an intricate topic, Like I actually just had a phone call straight before this of a young man who was. I told him, I said, I'm on a podcast later,
Hmm.
um, and it's regarding driving offences and motoring offences while under the influence. And he says, "Oh, I have very strong opinions on that. When I was 8 years old, I was struck by a motorist who left me with a walking impediment for the rest of my life and a huge dent in the side of my head, who was under the influence of cannabis. And that person was allowed to go free and nothing happened to them. So I have very strong opinions on that." And I said, "Hey, listen, I know you're not my audience here by me trying to get these people, away with it, but there is a spectrum. It's not just that somebody who's behind the wheel of a car who's under the influence of cannabis is automatically guilt free and that they
Yeah.
should go
Yeah.
free. That person should have been held responsible for their actions. But equally speaking, one of our patients who lives in rural England, who is already experiencing terrible circumstances with their illness, should not be isolated in their homes without their ability to go forward and actually engage with the community. Just because they're sick doesn't mean they should already be imprisoned within their bodies, but also in their homes.
Absolutely.
So it's
Absolutely.
really, yeah, it's close to my heart, this subject.
And I think there aren't many other topics that as clearly highlight, that sort of social difficulty sometimes in terms of acknowledging cannabis's role, and its increasing role, and there is certainly a generally growing consensus that, look, this is a serious medicine.
Mm.
It's been a serious medicine for a very, very long time, much longer than lawmakers here have been talking about it. But I think the way to get over that first hurdle with the first gentleman you were talking about is that it isn't about whether it's cannabis or not. It's about responsibly using medication, whatever that medication is, whether it's cannabis or diazepam or any name your medicine,
Yeah.
and of course, people who take medicine to the extent that it renders them impaired when it
Hmm.
comes to driving, they should be held responsible if there are issues and if they cause harm to other people. But
Agreed.
it's a bit of a red herring to lay it at the door of cannabis more so than you would do with other medications.
Night nurse.
Yeah, anything, and
Yeah.
there are any number of medications. I should have thought of a few more examples, but any number of medications that may render you impaired, or at least give you enough cause to believe that you shouldn't be driving when you're taking that particular medication, or at least a particular strength of that medication.
Of course.
And cannabis is no different, for good reason. But there is definitely a societal issue there in terms of putting it in the same category as ordinary medications, as opposed to purely being looked at as some sort of recreational use product, and lumping it in the same category as alcohol or any of the other recreational drugs that don't necessarily have um, a more legitimate use on a day-to-day basis.
Of
Um,
course, of
but I
course.
mean, the law at least changed here about 10 years ago, to reflect that, such that the Road Traffic Act was amended by virtue of some regulations which incorporated minimum blood levels for a certain number of drugs, most of which you'll read through the list and you'll see that they're the main recreational drugs. It's your cocaines, it's your MDMAs, and cannabis has been lumped into it as well.
It's weird.
Um,
It's such a weird thing that, like, what is it, 0.3 levels of, like, the how they actually denote how much cannabis is in your blood. Even I find quite strange. Like, I can't
well,
remember
it's
exactly.
my totally unscientific knowledge is that, and I say my totally unscientific knowledge, it's borrowed from scientists, who have looked at this sort of thing. I'll give you an example in just a moment, but it's nigh on impossible to tell from a blood sample when a patient has been taking cannabis, how much they took and when.
Hmm.
So it's really dangerous to try and overly simplify the system by saying, look, if you've got more than a certain amount in your blood level, you must therefore be over the limit, as you would say with alcohol.
Yeah, much
Um,
easier with alcohol because of its immediate impact and how it's metabolized.
yeah, yeah,
Cannabis is
yep,
more nuanced than that, and
much more.
even, it can be in the system for a very long time and be detectable, but you're not actually under the influence of cannabis. It's the
Yeah,
same with these, like, hair testing and urine testing, etc. So I think to oversimplify it is to trivialize the question, really, and it
it
feels
it, it, it,
unjust.
it it is, which is, I suppose, a symptom of a really struggling criminal justice system that, it has to simplify things to a certain extent, or it would just explode, and
Collapse.
it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
on
yeah.
the brink of exploding anyway. If you
Agreed.
ask any user of the criminal justice system, or professionals within it, um, but going back to the very specific example of medicinal cannabis, the law makes separate provision for um, individuals who are impaired by virtue of whatever medication they have taken, being guilty of a separate offence. So,
Okay.
I could have a sky high cannabis reading, but actually I'm not impaired.
Yep.
I'm not intoxicated in the sort of traditional sense. You know,
Hmm.
I may have a particularly high tolerance. I may have used it quite some time ago, and it's built up in my blood, um, um, in that sort of way. But
Hmm.
my driving's perfectly safe, and by the way, I'm not obviously not suggesting that anyone sort of try this. It's the bottom line is, and the law makes very clear that you've got to be taking uh, medicine that's prescribed to you, and you've got to be taking it within the guidance that's been provided to you by your prescribing doctor, but also the guidance provided by the manufacturer, which is very
Exactly.
important. So it's not purely down to you to decide what is
I
safe and what
feel
isn't.
like
But
I'm not drunk.
yeah, yeah,
At
yeah,
five
exactly,
pints in, I
exactly.
don't
Don't tell
feel
me if
drunk.
yeah,
It's clear. Like, then that's a really good thing that we should probably stick in right now, is that, um, yeah, if you're watching this and you think it's, you feel good enough to drive or whatever, like, that's not a reasonable excuse. Like,
yeah.
you've got to follow the guidelines. So
You,
if ever there's a point where you're in doubt, abstain. Like,
yeah.
when in
And
doubt, do now.
when in doubt, do not. A cautious approach has got to be the right one, and particularly as people are, I suppose, potentially new to cannabis medicines. But
Hmm.
I mean, just to give you sort of a recent example that I dealt with, a young gentleman who had been um, pulled over by police, not in respect of any bad driving. It was totally separate, and was nothing untoward whatsoever. But he was stopped by police, who claimed they could smell cannabis from the car. This was a chap with a prescription who had
Mm-hmm.
been taking his medicinal cannabis within the bounds of his prescription and the guidance he was given as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was found to have a blood reading of higher than 2 micrograms per liter of blood, which is the legal limit, as I say, ushered
Yeah,
in.
that's what it is. Like I thought it was 3 micrograms or some bizarre, abstract number, but
Yeah,
which doesn't translate really to me as a medical cannabis user myself. Because yeah, I mean, if I take one puff of any cannabis, I can't, never mind drive, I can't walk,
yeah,
and that's a single
yeah.
puff. So people are so individual. But yeah, please continue.
Well, he was he. I mean, there was no suggestion he was impaired driving. In fact, he was actually commended by the officer in terms of his pulling in skills when he was stopped. So there
Hmm.
was no dispute that this guy was not posing any risk to anyone on the road, and there was no suggestion that he had done. Regardless of that, he was taken in for questioning. He was found to have a blood reading over and above the 2 microgram allowance, but no suggestion of any impairment.
Hmm.
Um, he was released by the police for further investigation, which is quite common, and these things can often take months and months and months and months.
Yeah,
And throughout that period, as you can imagine, as a patient and as a motorist, you're pretty
it's in your
concerned
mind.
that even though you're pretty sure you haven't done anything wrong, it's all starting to feel a little bit like you're being treated as guilty before any sort of findings
Well,
been made against you.
that's exactly what
Um,
happens from
it's yeah,
experience to
and,
people.
and
That's
and it's sad that as well, because you've got these people who, for the most part, without wanting to skip ahead too far into the future, are generally found to not have done anything wrong. But
hmm
for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, they're sitting there feeling like they are a criminal for
absolutely.
just taking their medication.
I'm dealing with that right
And
now.
yeah,
I have somebody literally on WhatsApp right now who's going through that exact situation, and they are. It's no. I am not being hyperbolic to say that this individual is literally tearing his hair out because he cannot get an answer.
yep,
He in what we would consider within the confines of his legal and prescribed medical context has done nothing wrong ostensibly, but the question mark hanging over his head is enough to further the PTSD, anxiety,
yep.
stress that he is prescribed the medical cannabis for in the first place,
Absolutely, and that
which
that's
is
that's the really cruel thing about it.
it's insane.
You're further ostracized and made to feel as though you've done something wrong, and by virtue of the nature of the conditions that people are often prescribed medicinal cannabis for, it's just compounding it.
Absolutely,
And as you say, they're asking for answers, they're asking for updates. They're not receiving them from the police. They're not receiving them from the Crown Prosecution Service, who are effectively the
exactly.
sort of state's criminal lawyers acting on behalf of the Crown. And they start to feel even more and more isolated than before.
Hmm.
But in this particular case, I was brought in to take a look at it, and in my naivety, I thought, gosh, this is really quite straightforward to iron out for this guy. We'll just
Hmm.
highlight to the officer the statutory defence under Section 5A of the Road Traffic Act, which basically sets out the conditions that you have to satisfy to show that if you are above the legal limit for cannabis, that you do have a statutory medical defence.
Hmm.
And to do that, you have to show, firstly, that the specified controlled drug has been prescribed or supplied for medicinal or dental purposes. Tick. You've got to show that the drug's been taken in accordance with any direction given by the person prescribing it and accompanying instructions by the manufacturer. Tick. And you've got to show that the individual's possession of it was lawful, so that they had a prescription, they weren't self-medicating, and they haven't fallen foul of the law for any other reason in respect to possession of the cannabis. And
Hmm.
we could show all of this for this guy just through simple records and documents, even assistance from the particular prescribing um, clinic, which was able to
Hmm.
confirm, that everything he was saying was totally kosher and absolutely accurate. And it was just radio silence from the police.
It's
And
crazy.
then out of the blue, the guy finds himself receiving a postal summons saying you're now being charged with the Section 5A offence. Get
That
yourself
to
down
me,
to court.
that's cruel and unusual punishment
And,
to
well, I
me.
mean that was, and I'll tell you the abridged version, but I mean that was kind of just the beginning of the journey. And at that point, I'm sort of thinking to myself, okay, right, the police haven't understood this,
Hmm.
but surely the lawyers at the Crown Prosecution Service will understand this when we explain it to them. And it's just a bit of a misunderstanding. Hey ho, we'll get through it.
You'd like to
Um,
think so, right?
you'd think so, you'd think so, you'd think so. But what happened next was a real eye opener because. Um, I mean, the abridged version is that it took the instruction of two forensic experts, including the instruction of the National Crime Agency, who are generally held back to investigate things like serious organized crime, drug trafficking,
Yeah, yeah. It seems
child sex
crazy.
abuse. They're dealing with the serious stuff here.
Hmm.
Not to say that this isn't a serious topic, but we're talking about
It
a
is for
road
the
traffic
individual.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
And after the instruction of all of these experts by the CPS, who just wouldn't accept that it was possible that this guy could be over the limit in the way that he was, and there not be some sort of criminal offence there, they
Jesus.
eventually threw in the towel after the National Crime Agency's expert came back and um, confirmed that, look, you can't tell if this person would have been impaired by virtue of the blood reading. You can't tell when they took whatever they took, and what volumes and what frequency. And by the way, that sort of reading isn't in any way incompatible with this person's prescription. And only after then, and two hearings and lots of wasted time and stress
Hearings?
on this guy, they dropped it.
There was
But it was a long
hearings?
old slog.
Wow, that is absolutely shocking that they would drag that person through hearings.
And
Like,
it was interesting because speaking to the lawyer in that case, who was very nice, very
yeah,
pleasant, um, but just didn't really understand some of the core issues, and on more than one occasion, like in our client's situation, to a recovering alcoholic,
oh wow, that's
and made the
disgusting.
point, well, look, a recovering alcoholic shouldn't be able to say, well, because of my status as a recovering addict, if I'm over the drink drive limit, but I'm okay, I shouldn't be guilty of any criminal offence.
This is so
And when you
like
see that sort of reasoning put forward as sensible, it sort of leaves you scratching your head a bit, thinking you've not actually started to engage with this on the most basic of levels, which is that
absolutely.
this is now just like any other medicine. But
There's
that again, it goes back to what we were saying right at the beginning. It goes back to um, that social stigma around it. That I think it's a mixture of a lack of education on the part of police and prosecutors, but also a much wider countrywide social stigma
a
connected to it.
100% agree, and it's so shocking though that the the I can't I honestly struggle, and it beggars belief that any reasonable prosecutor would imagine that what could not possibly, even from an empathetic standpoint, understand that there's a clear medical need for the product. It's being prescribed. Even with the expert information that's been provided to them, that they would even consider to like what further even alienate the person
Yep.
by likening them to a recovering alcoholic.
Yeah. Not
That
there's anything wrong with that, but it's
no, no,
a different situation, isn't it? It's
yeah,
totally different.
exactly. Like everybody, it's quite clearly established that alcoholism is a disease. You can be predisposed to it.
Yep.
It's very well understood now. I think like there's certain genetics in your body that make you that your predisposition towards having an addictive nature, and alcohol being a trigger. And alcohol has been a trigger. And if you look at certain indigenous populations, I mean, I think the English were leveraging the Native Americans by giving them beer because it was so severely addictive to them that it was like literally a harmful drug because they'd never brewed alcohol. So the even bread was addictive, and that's quite clearly understood as being something that you cannot genetically negate.
Yep.
So, but to liken that to somebody else who is unwell and has found a suitable medication that works for them, and who should also be able to enjoy the same civil liberties that society
Yep.
affords others, is disgusting in the fact, by comparison, that you not only further alienate that person to make them feel like there's something wrong with them genetically, or that they're somehow predisposed to this condition, but that they're also unable to control themselves, like they don't have that level of control. No, that's not the case. If
Yeah.
I was sick, I would admit it, but actually, in this instance, the medicine is what works for me, and I'm being ostracized for that. And you seem to be the perpetrator almost, which feels like it's against like somebody's human. That's against like somebody's human rights almost to be
I mean,
recognised.
it feels discriminatory is what it feels
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah, you come
as
away
a
feeling
layman.
dirty,
Yeah.
like as if you've done something when actually this is at the orders of a doctor, a legitimate clinician in the UK who has said that this is safe for me to consume, and that I am actually within my rights to drive. Like, sorry, I'm getting a bit angry, but that does. I'm not gonna lie, that does piss me off,
No,
really,
look,
because
even, I've got a lot of respect for the police and for prosecutors because they do a very, very difficult job.
same, agreed.
Um, so no issue there. But it did start to feel quite a little Kafkaesque almost, even that even when they had their own expert before the NCA got involved, even when they had their own expert effectively saying, "Sorry, you don't have anywhere near enough evidence to proceed against this guy,"
It's beyond
they
reasonable
just
doubt,
wouldn't
right?
accept it.
It's beyond.
Yeah.
If I'm right, the test for a crime is beyond reasonable doubt.
Well, that's to be convicted by be convicted by a court. The court has to be sure that you're guilty.
Hmm.
To be prosecuted for an offence, there has to be sufficient evidence for a reasonable prospect of conviction,
Okay.
and it has to be in the public interest.
Okay.
So
Makes
two
sense.
issues there. If if I get involved in a fight outside a pub, and there's very clear evidence that two people set about me with a bottle, and
Hmm.
I defended myself, and I had to hit one of them to um, prevent myself being seriously harmed, and there's evidence of that. Well, look, I would have a defense of self-defense to any allegation of assault.
Hmm.
In the same way, Section 5A of the Road Traffic Act provides for that defense to the greater than reading offense.
Hmm.
So if I can show each of those things, I've got a defense in the same way that I would have a defense to an assault or name any other criminal offense where there are statutory defenses. My one slight gripe with the way the law is set out at the moment is that um, if there is any vulnerability from a patient's point of view, it's that um, the statutory defense isn't couched in terms of a person not being guilty of the offence if they can show something. Rather, it's shown that they will have a defence if they can produce this material,
Yeah, and
this
that's the
evidence.
question. That what's going through my head right now is, isn't that the reverse? It's like you're guilty until proven innocent, rather than innocent until proven guilty.
A little
Feels
bit.
like that.
But if you had a functioning system, the first couple of police officers that dealt with my guy should still have been able to say, right, the reading's over, but he has a bulletproof defense here.
Yeah, it
So
doesn't meet the
we're not going
test.
to prosecute him because why would we prosecute him? He's got a defense. It's obviously not in the public interest. The public interest is a really important aspect of the process because even if you technically can show that someone is guilty of a criminal offense, it's not always in the public interest to take them to court. And the public interest just means, you know, looking at the cost of it, looking at what society would think, looking at the
Hmm.
impact on that person. Is it really, So let's say you've got a severely ill grandmother with early onset dementia or something, and uh, she shoplifts or something like that.
Hmm.
Something that costs £3.50. Not a very good example. I'm not
No, no,
kidding.
but
Um,
I
you
see
know,
exactly where you're going with this, so
you,
it's
you
good.
might be
This is
able to
good.
show that some sort of criminal offence has been committed.
Hmm.
Yes, but are we the taxpayers in society thinking, yeah, it's a good use of our time, money, and resources to prosecute this lady? Obviously,
Yeah,
it's not.
exactly.
That's an extreme example, and I'm certainly not suggesting that just everyone who has a prescribed or even a self-prescribed, self-medicated reliance on medicinal cannabis should just be let off the hook. No, it's about
Balance.
responsible use of medicines. But in cases where you can show that there is a defence, or there very, very likely is a defence, these cases should be being stopped at a much earlier stage. They shouldn't
Agree.
be rumbling on to court. They shouldn't be resulting in several hearings where nothing happens, and just a lot of additional cost is incurred, and people become really stressed and even more marginalised than before.
Agreed. And I have been a victim of crime before, serious crime. Nothing like this. This is, ridiculous to me that we would be having
Yeah,
this conversation. But I've been a victim of serious crime. In the hearings that took place, I asked out of curiosity, like, what does this cost? All these people in here. I mean, that guy's clearly like my solicitor, etc. At the time. Just I won't go into details, but just the
yeah,
costs is tens and tens and tens of thousands of pounds. And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, is this a situation where, like, is this really worth it for us as the taxpayer? I mean, me included, I'm here and I'm paying tax. And the situation really is that I'm looking at this as such a clear cut and simple delineation between what's wrong and right.
yeah,
And there's a moral aspect. Your analogy with the grandmother, it's not that far out with the realms of possibility. I know a lady that I used to grow up with that shoplifted consistently because she had dementia.
yeah,
She just walked into the store, got what she needed, and walked straight back out. And they would chase after this woman. And do you know what they did? The store, do you know what they did? It says, "Oh, you forgot to pay." She was never coming back. She'd be back tomorrow, and
yeah,
she'd be nicking it again. But they had the care and sensitivity to realise that she can't even remember that she's here. So we'll bring her
yeah.
back, and she'll pay for what's there. And it's in society's interest to guide this in the societal context to not being a crime. Like, and so there
That's
was a bit of
exactly
like
it.
community policing happening from a ethical and moral standpoint. When in actual fact, if you were to look at this in a George Orwell 1984 capacity, you've done a crime, that's it, thought jail for you, never with no prospect of release. But actually, like we said at the beginning, it is way more nuanced than that. There is a human element to this. There's also the balance of a reasonable conviction, etc.
Yeah,
They don't. This, in my opinion, is a non-issue because the minute that somebody does have a prescription, I don't feel that there is a reasonable excuse to pursue this. But then there's the other element, which is that CanCard, in its inception, has always been to be a tool, right? So somebody who doesn't have a prescription, because I've said this ad nauseum, but Carly was the first. She got a prescription, but then it sort of opened the floodgates, and then it's like, okay, cool. Well, actually, I can't afford a prescription. However, I am using this in a legal capacity,
yeah,
and I'm using this in a way which would be in line with what a physician would recommend, and I'm using it within the limits. And so then it goes on to, right, this is where I feel maybe law is actually lacking, where we don't really have the consideration. Well, there are two tiers of patients here. There are patients with a prescription that are enshrined in law under the Road Traffic Act. We have
absolutely.
these delineations between what's a crime and what's innocence, and a reasonable defence, and an expectation that that person would be, you know, fe- without fear of prosecution. But
Yeah,
then you've got the person that's doing the exact same thing, but they just have a CAN card
yeah,
and they can't afford a prescription. And that's simply because of the free market economy, which is allowed to exist outside of the NHS loop, right? They don't get any subsidies, they don't get any consideration from the NHS at all. They just don't get money. Clinics are private entities, they're there for profit. And so, but so if you can't afford it, it's just a pay to play system, which I feel is fundamentally against the spirit of the law in this country. To me,
yeah.
at least, that's my take on it.
No,
But
well, against the spirit of the law, and yeah, it's a wider issue, isn't it? Just a general assumption that people should have good access to the right medicine for them, regardless of what it costs or where it comes from. And the idea
agreed.
is that we shoulder the burden as a society, don't we?
Well,
And
so you're singing the same song as us now, man. We've been
yeah,
singing it
well,
for years.
it's we see it in criminal law as well. I mean, we've got effectively what we call a two-tier criminal justice system now. Where public funding, and I'll not go on about it because it's not the immediate topic of discussion, but it's the same point. Public funding for criminal defence has been totally decimated. And so you have people who can afford lawyers, and you have people who can't, and they're as much as we try to ensure that there is fairness across the board, it would be naive to think that they are all getting the same level of service. In a system that is as crucial to a properly functioning society as the justice system.
It's a little bit
Um,
Americanized, isn't it?
exactly that, exactly that. But I mean, look, if I'm to take any sort of silver lining, and I suppose parting positive views to my experience and my client's experience, it was something that the same prosecutor said to me, which was that one of the reasons they were taking my client's case so seriously was that they had seen lots of other similar cases.
Mm-hmm.
And, on one hand, it was interesting because they were seeing that as well. Lots of people are, trying to bend the rules here. Lots of people are offending.
Of course.
Another way to look at it is actually, no, these are growing pains.
Yeah.
This is actually now just the natural consequence of people being able to access their medication. More and more of them are being stopped for all manner of reasons, and they are now just working their way through the system. And you would hope that, I mean, a positive outlook on that would be that through the right sort of education. I know that yourself and Carly, you guys do a lot of outreach, including with police forces and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If the right sort of education can be dished out and people's views can hopefully change without too much of a delay and too many people having their lives ruined in the meantime,
That's the
then
biggest issue.
the pendulum will swing again, and people will realize, well, it's not because people are offending, it's because people are getting access to their medication.
Exactly. And it's always the same in any system, right? Like thermodynamics, right? Just take like the laws of entropy. This is that exact same sort of systematic thing. Like whenever a system approaches a critical mass, you get there more instances
Yeah,
of these sort of items that crop
exactly.
up, right? And we are reaching a point now where cannabis medicines are quite freely available if you have the cash as a prescription. I don't know if that's entirely fair, but that's a topic for another discussion. But you're right, and it's like, well, let us know. And by the way, I'm not naive. I understand there's going to be people out there that will probably that are eligible that will apply for a CAN card,
Mhm.
which would just use it to get off with driving offences. Right? We weren't born yesterday. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way, right? But we try to negate that, and we try to, from a harm reduction standpoint, limit the access to genuine patients with genuine causes that have genuine conditions. And so there are very few instances of that. So that's why we're so impassioned and emboldened, because of the genuine cases that come through the door. We see very little like disingenuous holders.
yeah.
But the truth is the truth, and it's so prohibitively expensive. Um, you're right. This is the exact word. It's growing pains, and I don't think people. You're right. The education. I would love to be able to sit in front of a group of, what would you call them? Because I don't have a good knowledge of the law, but the prosecutors, right?
Yes.
Whoever
Yeah.
these people are, let's say there's 150 of them that cover all the territories. That might be totally naive. I'd love to get a webinar that all those people watched, and I would just say, listen, some people are sick. They can now easily just within
Yeah.
20 minutes go and register for medical cannabis. Within a week, they can have a prescription. They can buy that first one, and then you just that's it. That's the job is done now, right? Even if they just buy the first one, they're still technically covered by that prescription because there's a reasonable expectation that they
Yeah.
would continue that
It's
treatment.
going to be repeated. Yeah.
Exactly. And the clinic at any point after that will issue a prescription. 6 months, 12 months, 9 months, whatever. Um, you would obviously have to update your summary of care to show that your situation was the same. But many people that are applying for this have multiple sclerosis. They've got serious issues. They ain't just going to fix themselves overnight. So, there's another bar there. But it's you're right. I mean, that word is the right word, growing pains. But
I
it's
think
like anything.
that's a positive spin on it, and I think it's good to try and find something positive in these cases. Otherwise, you just pull all your hair out. But
Absolutely.
on the education thing, I mean, I think do it. Let's do it. I mean, it's but part of the problem is you've got any number of different police forces. You've got any number of different crime prosecution service areas, and these sorts of offences they're not specialists, such that they are sort of being centralized by a group that have um, a growing body of expertise. You know,
Hmm.
you'll have thousands of prosecutors, some of whom will never come across one of these cases, some of whom will come across once every so often. But it just means that they're not really developing the sort of understanding and expertise that they only need to do it once to really get it. But you know, they do need a bit of a hand with it. And like, I'm sure there are all sorts of things going on behind the scenes with the CPS. I wouldn't just assume that isn't something they're looking into or already actively doing. But certainly my experience was that there was a lack of technical understanding, but also there was a lack of compassion. There was a lack of
Absolutely.
um, uh, respect for someone who should have been assumed to be a genuine patient unless they could prove that they weren't,
Yeah.
and they weren't able to do that.
And that seems to be the common thread, actually, between the people. I won't give away their locations, right? But you could not get further away from each other with these
Yeah,
guys, right? It's not just a localized, centralized sort of issue. These people are three individual men. And the thing is, they fit a certain bill, which is really strange, right? And I'm not going to allege that there's any kind of profiling happening, but
yeah,
if there was one guy that you would want to slap cuffs on and hope that he had weed in his pocket, it might be these guys,
yeah,
and they'll admit that to themselves. They've admitted that themselves privately, right? Which is fair, and the truth is the truth, and they know that there's certain amount of uh, you know certain lifestyles and certain ways of dressing attract certain
yeah.
attitudes, which is fine. Me, I would never. I've walked down the street with cannabis in my pocket all the time. I've actually been in a police station with cannabis on me, and I've went there to report a crime and completely forgot that I had the weed in my pocket, and came back out and went, that would never really happen to anybody else if they didn't look like me.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of don't fit the mold. And I was in an interview room actually with cannabis in my pocket. So it's not like I just went to the front desk. I was
Yeah.
behind the precipice. So I was pretty lucky to not look like I'm involved or whatever. But um, it's strange because there is an automatic assumption of guilt, and it's maybe based in a prejudice that we hold. And I think that is like when you say growing pains, right? It also extends to attitudes,
Yeah.
compassion for others,
Definitely.
and appearances. And so there's conceived notions and how we judge other people based on how they look. That comes in, and I think it spans across all races, skin colors,
Yeah.
whatever. Because the three individuals that I'm talking to are from wildly different socio-economic backgrounds,
They've had
ethnic
very
backgrounds.
similar experiences. Yeah. And was
Yeah,
that?
and have
It sounds like they had similar experiences to my clients in that they.
exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally exact, and it's being used against them. And they're two of the individuals specifically are their lives are being impacted in a way which is not reasonable for it. If you commit a crime, I'm happy that you're a bit stressed out that you don't know if you're going to jail.
Yeah.
That's part of the consequences
Yeah.
almost. Like if you're going to commit a crime, then there's going to be a shed load of stress on you to know that you could go down for this, and that makes me go to sleep easier at night. But if you're a reasonable individual who's medicating within the confines of the law and who's done what their clinicians told them, you don't deserve that. In my opinion, that is tantamount to like some form of bizarre punishment that
Yeah.
you should never undergo. But that's
And,
happening.
and how awful to think it might actually impact on how that person um, takes their medication.
A hundred
You know,
percent. They don't leave the house. They
it's
don't.
overreaching and impacting on um, your own healthcare in a way that you know um, it's not qualified to do.
There's
So I think that's quite a
exactly.
worrying
There's an
possible
individual
consequence.
there's an individual that I'm dealing with that if he is convicted for this, it will change his life in a way which is absolutely completely unjust. It will take away this person's livelihood in a way which me and you could never fully understand. I mean, the
Hmm.
magnitude of this conviction is so far-reaching to the wider capabilities of this individual that it seems like being sentenced to death for shoplifting.
Yeah,
Really, that's what it's the equivalent of. Like it's like getting your hands chopped off for stealing an orange. Really, and you think to yourself, we need to fight against this. We need to have a basis in law where that immediately is recognised, and this is the problem with the cannabis discussion, is that it's so far reaching into all these different tendrils of life. Is it family life? Does it affect how you can look after your children? Does it affect your cognizance? Are you able to work and make decisions if you look after others in a care home? Are you even functional enough to be able to be in control of your own finances? Really, like, these questions come up when, in fact, other people that are on far more impactful medications like opiates are
Yeah,
never asked these questions. I know people that have fentanyl patches. If you put one of those fentanyl patches in your head or whatever,
you'll know
you're out of
about
the
it.
game. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
but they get to go into bars, pubs, and nightclubs with fentanyl. But somebody has a gram of weed and it's like a seizure medication, and they're not allowed in. It's
yeah.
it makes me angry. But I suppose that's why they let me do this podcast, because uh, because I get angry about it. But this has
It's
been
productive
such,
anger. It's productive
yeah,
anger, and I think you look. It's no use complaining about these things behind the scenes when you do see examples in real life, or you're one of the, um, uh, you're one of the, I say, lucky people. You are lucky in some respects to be able to sort of see these people up and down the country and to be able to actually draw the lines between the dots, because that's what's missing here.
exactly.
No one's saying that actually, it's too much of a coincidence that these, there'll be hundreds of people as we're speaking that are going through this process.
And hundreds will
Um,
watch this.
yeah, and they don't know that they don't know that they're not the only ones going through it. And if not, I mean, you would like to think that if there is that critical mass that forms, there will be perhaps some sort of policy announcement by the CPS, or perhaps a slight tinkering with the Section 5A uh, offence of being in excess of the limit, and the defence there would potentially help. So there are things that can be done, but I think the most effective thing, and the thing that will have the most wide ranging impact, is education, outreach, and understanding,
Agreed.
and a smattering of respect and dignity for people who,
Uh,
as I say, you don't accuse anyone of anything and assume their guilt, and these people need to be assumed innocent until shown otherwise.
that's exactly it. I agree. Have you heard of the black belt barrister?
No, but I like the sound
Check
of
him out,
them.
man. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a YouTuber, right? Black belt barrister, and he does loads of stuff like that. Have you ever considered doing like a YouTube channel about this type of stuff, or
Oh, flip. I mean, look, I leave it to the pros to do that sort of
right?
thing. We do we do our chatting in court. We like getting up on our feet. We like arguing the toss with the court, and it's nice when you don't have to do that.
Yeah,
It's a very different sort of forum, and sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't. But um, these sorts of clients, you don't want them to have to go to court at all.
agreed.
Even that in itself feels like a bit of a loss for you,
The
because
process is
it's
the punishment.
the process, the punishment. Absolutely,
Agreed.
absolutely.
That's like, I feel like in civil law, you can litigate against people frivolously, and you can use that process
Quite right.
as the punishment. But I don't think that's appropriate in a criminal context, because the stress of being prosecuted by the state is so much
Yeah,
heavier than a grievance of another, that it can drive you
absolutely.
to extremes. It can make you feel like society itself is stacked against you. And the weight
Absolutely.
of that, not everybody is equipped to handle that weight, which
No,
to me is the unjust element. And
absolutely.
I've said that many times to the people that I've spoken with. But look, David, this is, I'm sure we could go on for another 3 hours about this.
No,
But in closing,
I love chatting about this stuff, and I'd be happy to speak to your contacts as well who've been struggling with this sort of thing, and even if we can point them in the direction of people across the country who can potentially help, because
yeah,
there is a growing legal community, and I say it's the same lawyers a lot of the time who are working on big commercial deals, and um, uh, you know big licensing projects for companies. you've got everyone working from that end of the spectrum in terms of cannabis law down to this sort of stuff. But regardless of what sort of side of the divide they're on, they feel strongly that this is about respect and dignity for patients with a genuine need. And that's where I see us as aligned with what you guys are doing, because it's about exactly the same thing. It's about acknowledging that and respect for that, and not asking for anything more than to be treated as anyone else with a genuine medical need, right?
That's
So
exactly it.
it's been nice to work
Empathy.
with you on this.
No, that's that empathy, and it's so good to see that. Like it's emerging, but empathy crosses every divide. To
Yep,
understand the
absolutely.
needs of another human being and to treat them as an equal, and to come there with no judgment is such an important aspect of law. I feel that it's amazing to see that there are people, compassionate individuals like yourself out there with the skill set and the knowledge that you have, that would stand up and champion those
Yep.
basic inalienable rights that people deserve. So it's super refreshing to see, David. And I have one closing question. Now I
Sure.
know you're not allowed to give any legal advice, right? And I won't put you on that spot, but maybe, is there another way? Is there something that we can say to anybody watching this that would be maybe not guidance, and maybe that's too strong a word, but uh, I'm trying to think of another word for guidance that would be less legally, would have less legal implications. Like, how can we point people who are facing this? What can we do for them?
Yeah.
In this capacity now.
Oh, look, I think the really boring answer to people is um, work out what you need to do to be within the law, get your documents together. If you have to leave them in your glove compartment or something, so they're always with you when you're out on the road, and you can't do anything more than that. Um, there's some really good resources out there. We did some work with the Cannabis Industry Council, who have published some guidance both for patients but also for police officers and law enforcement.
Hmm.
And if you check out some of those guides, they set out sort of blow by blow what you need to do. And yeah, it's just about, not that you should have to live your life thinking, oh, I might have to produce my documents. It sounds a bit like living in some sort of wacky dictatorship, but
Yeah,
if that gives you a little bit of peace of mind also, then it's certainly worth it.
agreed. Well, David, thank you so much. This has been a
No,
fantastic
thanks, Paul.
chat, and I'm certain that this is going to be of great value to thousands and thousands of people out there. And hopefully, we'll provide them with a bit of counterbalancing information from what they're being told. I'm hearing now, which is very common, that other solicitors that are charged with proving the innocence of these individuals are actually telling them that they are without hope. And
Yeah.
I've heard that on more than one occasion now. So I feel really great about us being able to put that out there and put a ray of hope into people's minds. And I hope for anybody watching this, if you need any assistance, reach out to myself. I'm very contactable. David, I don't know about you, but I'm sure that we
Oh,
can put
please.
some,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure that people will be able to reach out to you. So, again, thank you to yourself, David, and thanks to BCL. I suppose, obviously, by virtue of you being a partner and working on these incredibly important cases and trying to level the playing field for us as patients, it's been an honour and a privilege, and I thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate your time.
Cheers.
Really nice
Thank you so
chatting.
much.
Bye.